Welcome to episode 4 of Chasers. I'm Ryan Miller. This is the show where I've gone into the boxes upon boxes in the garages and closets of my life and come up with some of the collectibles that have caught my eye over the years. Here in season 1, we're still dealing largely with the Marvel Universe series of trading cards, and we're still in 1992 with Special Projects editor Bob Budiansky and young upstart assistant Tom Brevoort and their ever-growing team of people. Business is still booming. They are more ambitious than ever, and they have the room to be, honestly. They've done their X-Men set, all one artist, and they're looking at doing another set with all one artist. But what if they were all painted? And I guess this harkens back to some collectible cards that were painted in the 60s. I guess it's been a thing before. I was not alive then and have not since collected them, so I couldn't tell you much about that. But apparently that part wasn't new. But what was new was the guy that got to do it. And I'm going to be honest, this was a ton of fun. This one, going back and looking up both the history behind the man and also the series. And it was the same man that painted all those spacey backgrounds for Marvel Universe Series 3 that we talked about last week, actually. A man named Joe Jusko, who, before all of those spacey backgrounds, went to school to become an illustrator. In fact, went to a high school to become an illustrator, the High School of Art and Design, which I wish I had here. Apparently it's one of a kind in more ways than one. But when he graduated that school as an illustrator, he received the DC Comics Award for Excellence in Cartooning that came with a $50 gift card to an art supply store down the street, where he went and bought some paint for the first time, and I guess decided to try his hand at painting. And not long after, amazingly enough, in 1977, he got a job doing the cover for Heavy Metal magazine, which should be a surprise to no one who knows the name Joe Jusko, even this early on in his career. That doesn't seem like an odd matchup at all. And usually I don't do the artwork down in the corner, but it was so fun going through and looking up some of the art he has done over the years that I just gotta throw him up on the screen. But within a year of doing that Heavy Metal magazine cover, he was working at Marvel. And I guess at the time, painted covers for comic books wasn't done a whole lot. I guess it was more of a magazine thing, so maybe Marvel was doing more of that with its Curtis imprint. But at the time, it was just him, and he quotes two other outright legends, Bob Larkin and Earl Norem, kicking around at Marvel, again, while he's just 18. So over the years, he's done plenty of stuff to look at. I pulled some that I just loved. The 81 cover of Savage Sword of Conan, another good fit. There's an 88 thing he did for, I think it was actually called Marvel Graphic Novels or something like that, but it's a Silver Surfer. He did Nick Fury in the same year. This Deathlock and this Punisher are great. Suffice it to say that he very quickly becomes Marvel's painted cover guy. In fact, I think anything that was painted at Marvel, Joe Jusko was in the conversation. So when business is booming in the card space and Budiansky and Brevoort start thinking about what else they can do, they start thinking about all those painted cards from the 1960s, which, think about Mars Attacks, actually. If you've never looked at that actual set from the 60s, it's gorgeous. So when they started thinking of something like that, of course they would think of Marvel's main guy for painted work at the time, Joe Jusko. So that's basically how the Marvel Masterpieces series of trading cards came to be. Arguably the biggest series I'm going to talk about in any of these episodes. And I don't mean in terms of cards, it's just 105 cards. But I think it's probably the most popular and certainly most enduring set of cards that Marvel has probably ever done. And you can at me on that, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. But it's unfair to say just 105 cards, because not only they're all paintings, even though he's working in half pages basically before they get shrunk down to card size, he had to do all 105, including the chase cards, in just 3 months. And not just 3 months, but if I understand correctly, he had to do it all in April through June of 1992 itself, the same year the cards came out. So I don't think it affected the quality of the cards, but I also owned this optical illusion binder with the crossed out Stussy logo on the cover. So what do I know? But unfortunately, the first thing I see when I open this up also is not any of the awesome artwork. It's this stinking blob card and the chip that I have out of the top there. I don't even know if you can see it on camera, but I manhandled these cards more than any other set. It's because I was holding Renaissance art in my hands or something, you know, back when my entire appreciation of art had to do with paintings are fancy. And if you see any missing, it's because for whatever reason, some of them are more warped than others. I think this plastic might be contracting a bit with age, but those are currently under a book. So forget about those for now. But I felt like I was holding something that was already worth money in my hands just to look at these things. And the back wasn't any different. You can tell they went with kind of the marbleized sidebar there, tiny comic, which everybody knows I love tiny comics, and just a small description, and finally the Skybox logo, since these were made late enough in the year that they could switch from the Impel logo. And honestly, man, who can't just love some of these? It's funny because they did do some reproductions for some alternate covers of comics, I think a few years back, and Joe Jusko was saying how he doesn't love those necessarily because since he was working in a half page and he was working in mixed media at the time, which to hear him describe mixed media basically meant whatever he could do to get the job done. He was using colored pencil, marker, gouache, acrylic, airbrush, even just all together. So he said when you blew them up really big for those comic book covers, you could kind of see some of the imperfections, which I still don't know if I could have seen. And honestly, some of these are so iconic. They really stand in stark contrast to something like Marvel Universe Series 3, which, again, I don't mean in a bad way, but this shares some of the elements. Even with that simple border, you can tell with Colossus and Cage here, some of the elements are overlapping that border. But other than that, Jusko was in charge of the frame. And I mean that pretty literally, because I guess the first thing he did was bring in 25 sketches for approval. And when he got back a whole bunch of changes, he was like, I can't do it this way in 3 months. So he said those were the only sketches he turned in. After that, it was him all the way, just completing the cards and bringing in the finished product. And he said he didn't get back any more changes after that. So, and I know we talked about how Series 3 was graphically designed and all that. Not that he doesn't dabble with some of that, you know, Green Goblin with that background, especially Captain America, Captain Britain here. Obviously, we're dealing with iconography more than some of this stuff, but whenever he does it, it's with obvious purpose. You know, if you're going to do Daredevil, you're going to put Hell's Kitchen in there. Probably the same with Darkhawk. So brilliant decisions throughout. And honestly, what I love the most probably is for such a classical treatment, he sticks with the classical costumes as well. And it's not surprising also hearing him talk about his history, because he came up as a Marvel kid reading Marvel comics when these characters were largely dressed like this. Even Hulk, I mean, he's just got the purple pants on. And I'd probably take that in the place of any deep cuts, because you're not going to see any real obscure characters in this set. Maybe Mole Man gets out there. You're going to see North Star pretty soon. It's not one I often hear about. Okay, the Magneto one is outright hilarious. They're all like power tools, and there's literally a doorknob and a hammer that he's messing with. Like, I feel like at this point, certainly even in comics, Magneto had moved beyond the simple, you know, throwing magnetic objects around and dealing with magnetic fields and whatnot. So I think that stands out as a pretty funny card of robbing somebody's tool bench or something. I don't know. But doesn't mar the impact of this set at all. Nightmare, I guess. Again, I don't hear much about him lately. It's hard to tell, honestly, because when I collected these were all like top tier characters. These were all characters that I knew about, but also chicken egg. It might have been because of these cards. You know, I don't know that I ever read a comic with Mr. Sinister, but looking at that card, I liked Mr. Sinister because that was freaking awesome. There's North Star. But yeah, other than that, all pretty well-known figures. And just, once again, beautiful work. It really is. The Sabretooth card, I guess, was the only card, and he says only painting, that he's actually ever redone. He didn't like the first one that he did, so he trashed it, and he did a new one for it. And said since then, has not done or redone a painting, which That's probably a sign of some skill there. You can always fix something. Again, the choices he makes, I pretty much love every one. For the Thing, just an extreme close-up on his face. Takes up the whole frame. Tombstone might be another you don't hear a ton about lately. Wolverine coming off awfully ghostly there for whatever reason. One thing you'll notice that isn't my fault is that the cuts are kind of all over the place with some of these. See if I can find a good example here. Yeah, Nova, that's got some card on the edge there that is not him. It's pretty much the same for Green Goblin. Ghost Rider has a little bit of that as well. I thought I had more, yeah. And if you don't catch a little bit of another card in there, sometimes you can just tell because that tiny thin line of a frame is really off-center, and I would say most of them are off-center. And honestly, the only reason I'm even noticing that now is because when I look up the early grading criteria for some of these cards, which some companies have begun to do, I believe CGC, no, it's not CGC. There's a company that's doing it on their own. Anyway, that's part of what they'll grade the card on, is how centered the frame is. So I would imagine that matters for some of these, for people that are grading these. But I could look through these forever. And I actually almost forgot that I do have some chase cards in this old Walkman case of mine. Well, okay, so I have one chase card, but I have two of the promo cards. These are the cards they would just kind of leave on the table that people could take as they wanted, as kind of an ad for the set. I don't know if they ever ended up being worth money, but people know they're out there, and of course I would collect them. But this is the chase card that I ended up, and I think you can kind of see it's got a bit of a shine to it in there. If I dare take it out, you might be able to see a little better. So, Captain America versus Red Skull. Not bad. This is actually the card I have of all my sets that's probably worth the most. So, if I ever got anything graded, this would probably be the one. But I don't really see that happening. And as you might have guessed, or just know because you're watching this, the cards were a huge success. Joe says his career changed overnight. And to this day, it's the thing that he signs the most of at conventions. It's the thing that people ask him about most often. And in fact, they did so well, apparently, they offered him Series 2, but they offered him Series 2 on a 3-month deadline again. So he politely declined, having just put in 20-plus hour days to turn in the first series in 3 months. So that might have had something to do with why I didn't collect any of Series 2, but it's also nearing 1993. My habits were changing, but I wasn't done just yet. So come back next time and we'll talk about Marvel Universe Series 4 and X-Men Series 2.